What can we do? So many, many questions and so many unacceptable answers. The nightmare was over. We were alive, but in a way dead too. There was no dancing in the streets, no speeches, no exuberance, no outbursts of revenge, for surely that would have been justifiable. No tombstones to visit, only fatigue, depression, and emptiness. We had lived through the impossible, yet people refused to listen, to understand, so there grew a silence to mute the pain. We went to my mother's house in Alexandrov, a suburb of Lodz. She would not believe that her parents wouldn't be there. Knocking on the door, she cried, "Mama, ich bin du, I'm here." The door finally opened just a bit, and there was the gardener. He looked stunned. "What are you doing here? Don't you know everyone is dead?" Mother fainted to the ground, but my cries revived her. Not letting us enter the house, my parents noticed something shiny being used as a doorstop. Mother asked to have it. "Oh, take it and go." It was my grandfather's, my Zadie's Kiddush cup, a precious legacy we now use at all our family life cycle events. As a child, I would often wake from nightmares of stories I heard in whispers from my parents and their friends. Through my tears, I would always ask God, why? Why do my friends have grandmas and grandpas? Why do we only have 4 of us at Shabbat, at Seders, at holidays? The number 6 million to me is my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my cousins, over and over and over again. After years of doubting the existence of God, I realized that the questions I should be asking were, how could civilized people do this to each other? Where was human morality? The Shoah occurred because individuals, organizations, and governments made choices that fostered hate, legalized discrimination, and ultimately allowed mass murder to happen. The Shoah did not begin with gas chambers, but began with words. My first childhood recollections are of Backnang, Germany, our displaced persons camp in the American sector of Germany. 2 of my father's brothers had made it through the war and were able to leave for the United States almost immediately. Unfortunately, we had to wait there 3 years for a visa. With $20 in our pockets, no English, no jobs, no place of our own, and a 10-day rough sea voyage in steerage, we arrived in New York, March 22nd, 1949. Ridiculed as a child for my clothes, for my accent, I took to silence. And in general, it remained so until 1988, when I decided to join a new international team program, spending 1 week in Poland and 1 week in Israel. I've been back 19 times. Since then, with thousands of Jewish teens from 50 countries, including my daughter, my 2 granddaughters, and even Rabbi Goldstein. In Poland, we search for remnants that are no more. Now only empty synagogues, deteriorating and overgrown cemeteries, and great houses of Jewish learning. Gone are the vibrant centers of Jewish life. Warsaw, Krakow, Lublin. Out of 3.5 million Jews before the war, there are approximately 10,000 left today in Poland. In the small shtetl town of Tikocin, Jews made up 70% of the population. There still stands a synagogue from the 16th century with prayers written on the walls for those without prayer books. We held a Torah service and danced, celebrating Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live. Knowing there must have been a cemetery as well, I asked Rabbi Goldstein to walk with me in my search. At the end of the main road, we saw some cows grazing in a partially walled-off area. We walked in, seeing some mounds amid the excrement. Looking close, we noticed Hebrew writing on some of the mostly buried stones. We had found the Jewish cemetery of Tikocin, the oldest Orthodox cemetery in all of Europe. Since then, we have started a high school essay contest as well as an art contest on Jewish life in Tikocin. We've begun a Jewish research library and adopted the cemetery for cleanup and rebuilding of a protective wall. And in 2010, I chose to have my bat mitzvah in that synagogue, being the first Jewish woman to do that, and probably the last since it's under the Orthodox auspices. There were 43,000 ghettos and camps across Nazi-occupied Europe. During the March of the Living, we visit 3 of the 6 death camps: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, and Majdanek. I will tell you a little bit about what we saw and continue to see. Auschwitz. Our bus pulled up to Auschwitz and the snow was still on the ground, although it was mid-April. The mud stuck to our boots. It was cold and we shivered in our warm jackets, but no one dared complain. We passed the souvenir shop, selling postcards, toys imprinted with the name Auschwitz. Past the hotel, past Polish children on a field trip to the camp, licking ice cream cones. We arrived at the infamous gate that reads, Arbeit macht frei, work sets you free. Auschwitz I, brick 2-story buildings look like a college campus, once serving as a Polish military barracks. The grass, though, was deceptive. Had it grown there during the war, the inmates would have eaten it, as they did with the barks of trees. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the largest of the 6 killing centers. 12 to 15,000 could be handled in one day alone. 12 to 15,000 one day. Now it's a museum of death. Most everything collected from the arrivals are in glass enclosures. Eyeglasses, brushes, shoes, talitot, bowls, suitcases, baby clothes, baby shoes, and 7 tons of human hair used to stuff mattresses and line boots. As I stood staring at a pair of brown lace children's shoes, memories of my childhood emerged. These could have been mine. We entered the gas chamber, the crematoria building, one of 5. The walls are still blue from the Zyklon B gas. I stopped the group in front of the crematorium. I hadn't really shared my family stories yet. Then what seemed like a gust of air carried a message for me from my Booby Shangle, my grandmother. Speak for me and my 2 babies. You be my voice. I don't have a voice anymore. Tell everyone what happened in this place. You be my voice. Through my tears, I shared her story, and then I asked everyone to join me in reciting Kaddish. I put a stone on the crematorium and let everyone out into the sunlight. This is why I came to this place, to say goodbye to my grandparents I never had a chance to say hello to. It was a time for the March of the Living. 15,000 Jewish teens, survivors, educators, and other staff from 50 countries around the world lined up according to country. A shofar blew, and all wearing our blue jackets, just like that, began our silent 5-kilometer march from Auschwitz I to Birkenau. What was once a march of death was now the March of the Living. A survivor wearing an old striped uniform held a Torah high so that all spectators could see Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live. We marched arm in arm, waving Israeli flags, prouder than we've ever been. We arrived in Birkenau, or Auschwitz II, for the Yom HaShoah ceremony, broadcast live to Israel. 2 big screens showed photos of some of the 1.5 million children that were killed. Speeches by the Prime Minister Shimon Peres, as well as Lech Walesa, President of Poland. Chief Rabbi Israel Lau, a youth choir from Canada, the lighting of 6 torches by survivors to the music of Schindler's List, and ended with El Malay and Kaddish. Although we were all spent, we walked through Birkenau, where over 1 million Jews were murdered. Trying to hide the evidence, the Nazis blew up the 4 crematoria there. Behind them were ash pits. After the bodies were burned, there were so many ashes. They threw them in the ash pits and in the rivers. I took my teens to one of the ash pits. I put my hands in the marsh. I pulled out grass, I pulled out dirt, and I pulled out human bones. 70 years later, I found a child's human bones. I found a child's tooth. Over 70 years later, there is still human bones here. And once again, we said Kaddish. We went on to Treblinka. So different. We arrived in a thick forest. It seemed so peaceful and quiet. Deadly quiet. We walked until we got to a clearing. It looked like the terrain of a different planet. There were jagged rocks like tombstones as far as the eye could see. 17,000. We had arrived. Treblinka, the second largest death camp, where 850,000 of us lost their lives. The largest stones were placed there as monuments to the people who lost their lives there. It represented different countries, the smaller ones, cities and towns. In the surrounding farms, the farmers were constantly digging up human bones. I walked to a farm I snuck over to a farm, and before being chased away by the Polish police, I picked up some of these bones. Holding these precious pieces in my hand, I handed them to a rabbi who was with us. Crying, he lit a memorial candle, dug a special hole. We put them in, and we recited Kaddish again together. Treblinka was totally destroyed by the Nazis. There was nothing left to see of what had really happened there, and this was very frightening. On our way back to the buses, we walked on to what looked like a cobblestone walkway until somebody noticed Hebrew letters on some of them. The Germans had desecrated the Jewish cemeteries in the area and used the broken headstones to build the road. Some of our boys, were determined to dig out as many of them as they could. They started to pull them out with their bare hands when one boy broke his finger. But he got the stone out and he carried it with him to Yad Vashem in Israel, and he buried it there. And then we went on to Majdanek. Although we had learned that the Majdanek concentration camp adjoined the city of Lublin, we were shocked to see gardens against the electrified fences. Human ash from the crematoria fell on their houses, their clothes, their cars. Obviously, the people could see, hear, smell the death of the 350,000 murdered here. The camp remains relatively the same from the time the Nazis hurriedly retreated in July of 1944. The first building you enter has the undressing room, the areas where the hair was shorn. Then naked, they were herded into a room with a large cement tub, disguised as a bathtub, but the water had lye in it for disinfection. The ceiling had shower heads and controls for either very hot or very cold water. The Nazis experimented to see which temperature was best to absorb the Cyclone B gas. Soaking wet, they then entered the gas chambers with the walls stained blue from the gas, and the hatch in the ceiling where the poison pellets were thrown. There was always a peephole in the wall, so the Nazis could watch as the men, women, and children clawed at the walls, holding the babies high for a last bit of breath. We thought we had reached the end after 7 chambers, until we came to the last room. A dissection table still stands in the center, used to search for valuables possibly hidden in one of the orifices of the body, and where the gold teeth were extracted. Then began the walk through the wooden barracks, built to house about 500. In reality, 800 to 1,000 were crowded in. Several were used to be storehouses, and still do. 800,000 pair of shoes were found here by the liberating Russian army. Many can still be found in 3 barracks. Working shoes, dress and Shabbat shoes, sandals, baby shoes, some so tiny the babies may never have taken their first steps in them. The smell of old leather permeated everything. The wind whistled outside, sounding like the cries of babies, wailing, mothers and fathers. I stretched to touch a lady's red shoe. Could this have been my bubby's? The barracks seemed to go on forever. And finally, we reached a big wooden structure with a tall chimney, the crematorium. A room with 5 ovens. 2 bodies were placed end to end. The ash and the bones could still be found in them. I had lost one set of grandparents in Auschwitz, and now the other set in this place. I reached in to touch 2 bits of bone. I then found myself outside of the building. I must have passed out, and some of the teens helped me up. I then noticed that a rose garden was planted there. A rose garden? To beautify what? The pain and the anger I felt then to see roses that were fertilized with human ash, perhaps even my grandparents. They would never know that they had a granddaughter who was born in another camp at about this time, and her name was Rose, Miss Rose. We walked on, this time up the steps of a huge capped, cylindrical building with the inscription in Polish, "Let